Edmund Kemper, and this guy was cutting the heads off college women, college girls, rehearsing really to kill his own mum. He had anger issues with his own mum. And when Jamie came in, wasn't this guy part of the introductory process?
Yeah, he was. When I first got to Vacaville, CMF Vacaville, for my reception, he was one of the inmates that did the orientation.
What year is this?
We're talking 1984. At 1984, you had two reception centers. Everything above Bakersfield, California was Northern, and that everybody went to Vacaville. So that was the reception center for that. Everybody from below Bakersfield all the way down to the Mexican border, that was Southern, and they all went to Chino at that time, California Institution for Men. So the day that I got there in an afternoon, got processed through, got put in my cell. The next morning we had chow, and then we were called down for an orientation. And there were 4 or 5 inmates in blue. We were wearing this funny, weird green color. It was kind of almost a fluorescent green. And they were wearing blues. Well, suddenly in this room walked this 6'9", 300-pound man. And he told us to sit back and listen to what was being told. And he spoke in a very monotone voice. And the very beginning of his speech to us was that he goes, "Every man must have a moral compass, and he must never stray from his moral compass." I had no idea who this guy was at that time. And he continued on for about 10 more minutes, then turned it over to somebody else who made light of a lot of things and didn't seem to, play it the same way. And then the third guy was the one that at that time caught my attention. Was the guy tells me, or he tells our group, he's sitting there talking to us all, and he says, "I want you to know that you're going to be given good choices and bad choices in prison. You have to decide which way you want to go." He says, "I came to prison with a 2-year marijuana beef. I was less than 2 weeks away from going home. I suddenly had somebody put in my cell that people that were a part of AB associate groups didn't like. They gave me a bogus line on what he actually had done. They gave me a knife and told me I had to stab him or they would stab me." And the guy said that he stabbed the guy in the leg thinking that he would just do his job. He stabbed him and it's good and everything. Problem was he cut the guy's femoral artery and the guy bled out and died. And so he ended up getting a life sentence after finishing his 2-year marijuana beef. And he had been in prison ever since, now trying to get out on a marijuana beef, or get out on the murder that had come about from the marijuana beef. And so he was one of the ones that really had put on the thing about don't let yourself get caught up behind other people's politics, other people's thing, because you could hear in his voice the sadness that he had done that and the disgust about the fact that, he brought it on himself. And so he's here. So now he was trying to, on his own odd way, he was trying to give us a warning. And I took it to heart.
But Kemper, there was no remorse in his voice.
No, his was straight monotone all the way through. And at the end, he stood by the door and we had to walk by him. And he basically had to duck to go into the doorway. So he was standing there and his head was above the door frame. But he positioned himself in such a way to make us have to walk right by him for what I felt was his attempt at intimidation. But during the few months I was there at Vacaville working in the medical department as surgical tech, because I had been moved over to the blue side for that, I actually got to know more about him from a lot of other people who were around.
And what was his first killing?
His first killing was actually 15 years old. He killed his grandmother. And then right after he killed his grandmother, he killed his grandfather the same day.
Do you know how he killed his grandmother?
Yeah, the way it goes down is that he had told people that his grandmother became very abusive verbally and got on him. He was only 15 years old, but he was over 6'4" at that time. And so he went and got his grandfather's rifle, shot her in the head, shot her in the back, and then waited till his grandfather came home from doing some grocery shopping and shot him on the front driveway. Then he called his mom and said, "This is what I've done. What do I do now?" His mom said, "Well, what I think you should do is call the police and stay right there." So he did. And then when they arrested him, they took him and had him placed in a mental hospital. He was in the hospital for about 6 years, at which point in time, all the doctors in the hospital had become quite enamored with his personality, thought he was just a misunderstood, troubled child. And they said that his biggest fault at that time was he lacked confidence in himself. And they had court psychiatrists that said, "Oh no, this guy is a straight psychopath, wop, wop, wop." And even he had told some of the doctors in the hospital that he had concerns about getting out, because of thoughts he had. And they told him, "It's okay. You're getting through puberty. You're now becoming a young man. They'll go away in time. Not going to be a problem." And then it was after he got out, about age 21, within just a couple of years, he started picking up girl hitchhikers, and he would dismember them. He would cannibalize some parts of them. He would have sex with their dead bodies even after he'd cut their heads off. But he believed that the head was the only real important part of a girl, because that's where the brain, the mouth, and the eyes are. Other than that, it's all just garbage.
Yeah, I watched an interview with him this morning, and they asked him, "Why did you cut the heads off?" And he said it was complex. He says he could say that he had pet chickens, and one day his mom cut the heads off the chickens and made him eat them, but it was far more complex than that. He also said that he was out back one day cutting the heads off, and the neighbors, the windows were open and everything. He was just doing it. There was all these times he could have possibly got caught. And before he started to actually kill the girls, he was like rehearsing it. Like he'd pick up a hitchhiker with a gun in the car and imagine what he was going to do. And then it got to the point where like he picked up 2 hitchhikers, tied one of them up, took one of them out, killed that one, came back to the other one. She was like, "What have you done?" He had blood all over him. He couldn't tell her. And then he killed that one as well.
Well, he had one of the girls that he actually picked up, like I said, with a gun, took her out someplace, got out of the car and locked himself out of the car while she was still in it. And he was able to convince her that if she let him back in, he wouldn't hurt her. And then he pulled her. After he got back in, of course, he did kill her and dismember her and stuff.
Yeah, he mentioned that on the interview as well.
But his last two killings was actually his mother, and he ripped out her vocal cords and ran them down a drain, disposal and stuff, and pulled out her eyes and all that stuff like that.
She'd come home drunk, hadn't she?
Well, yeah. And the thing was, but he'd had problems that she'd berated him all of his life, and had even told him that he must be homosexual and things like that. So it drove him to that. And then the last person he killed actually was his mom's best friend. And he called her up and said, "My mom's not feeling very well. You might want to come over and check on her." And she came over, and again, he cut her head off and did basically the same thing he did to his mom and stuff. But the thing was that there had been a number of times that he talked about that in some cases, he actually drove around the streets with the head of one of the girls on the seat in the car with him. And it was just amazing that, somehow people didn't catch up sooner and stuff. But the thing was that he basically had no remorse. And as a matter of fact, he's made the comment, he hasn't even gone to parole boards in a great number of years, because he says he's quite happy in prison. And funny enough, knowing how I heard him speak, he's actually done more than 500 books on tape for the blind, because they have that program there at Vacaville where you read books on the tape for the blind. Wow. And he's done more than 500. So somewhere out there are probably hundreds of blind people that are somewhat traumatized by that voice.
Yeah, one of the other things he said was that he basically felt he'd been rehearsing to kill his mum by killing these other women. Because, like you said,
Right.
this matriarchal family. And after he'd killed his mum, he got this sickness and then this feeling that he shouldn't be doing it anymore.
Right.
And he'd like followed the police, made friends with the police, and tried to get information out of them. They just saw him as like a friendly nuisance. He knew how not to give himself away, not to go to the funerals of the girls or anything like
Well,
that.
he actually tried to become a police officer.
Did he?
And funny enough, the police department he applied at had a height requirement, and he was exceeded that.
Wow.
Yeah. But the thing was, another thing that a lot of people don't realize is that he had been tested at Vacaville for his mental IQ status. Yeah. Well, when he was 15 years old, he was gauged to have 135 or higher. At Vacaville, the psychs said that they believed he far exceeded 145. Yeah.
Wow.
And the thing was that they allowed him, because of his involvement with so many psychs and stuff, to have input into some of the psychological tests that would later be used on other lifers. And so basically some of the baselines that he purposely put in, and actually took quite glee in the fact that he kind of buggered up these tests, that he could pass, but a person who wasn't quite as extreme as him could not pass.
Oh dear.
And so it actually affected a number of lifers, including myself later on, with these multi-phase personality tests and stuff. Yeah.
Did you have much interaction with him after induction, or was that it?
I actually had a few very momentary interactions with, because I was in the hospital. And when he came to the hospital, because another thing he was involved with was actually the hospice program for the guys who had HIV and AIDS. Because the actual paid staff at this time, AIDS was still an unknown factor. Could you get it from breathing the air or all that stuff? And he was actually one of the first guys, surprisingly showed compassion enough to go in there and sit, even though he wore a mask and gloves, to sit and talk to guys who were dying. And that has always been one of those things that has mystified psychs for years. But he used to come over to the hospital because he would come over and pick up like juices and pudding and jellos, things like that these guys could eat that they couldn't normally eat because of their illness. And but again, every time he came over, he was a very imposing figure. He asked for everything very monotonally, never said thank you, never said please, And basically it's like he didn't even acknowledge that you existed, just that you were there to provide something he wanted.
That's what mystified me about his character as well, because he said after he killed his mum, he knew he wasn't a lizard. He wasn't pure evil. The only way to stop the killings of the girls was to turn himself in. He just called the police. He said prior to killing his mum, he'd sat outside the sheriff's office and thought about doing it, but he needed that release of killing his mum to end that.